Hello, welcome back. Well, I don't often do this, but this is a book review, and we are going to be reviewing a monster manual, the 2025 Monster Manual. It's been out long enough that I feel like people should have had a chance to get hold of it, either the physical copy or the digital, and therefore you'll have probably formed some of your own opinions, which is why I'm doing this as late as I have. I'm not trying to do this in such a way where it comes out and I'm one of the first people to do that. Not that I could have done that anyway, because there are a lot of people who would have got this well before me. Um, it's one of those things. So I've already talked before about the Monster Manual for 2025 with Nacho Man on Wizards and Warp Drives, but I'm going to do it again. And I said I promised I would do it on my channel, so I will. I've had time to review my thoughts. I would put up a poll. I see that Fred Huber is here, and so is Nacho. Thank you for being here. So let's get into this. There's a lot for me to say and never enough time, so let's cover it. Hi, welcome to How to RPG. My name is Fred Wheeler, and today I want to talk about a monster book, the Monster Manual for 2025. It is a successor to the Monster Manual for 2014. For those of you who are unaware, I was part of the playtesting, the alpha and beta playtesting for the monsters in the Monster Manual for 2014, not for the new one. And I have an opinion now. I have quite a few opinions about what I think is good or bad about this. So first off, there are three things that a monster book has to do and do well. And I guess the first thing I'd have to say is exciting monster art, or at least decent monster art, needs to be there. Right, you need to have something like that. Mathematical stat blocks that actually work in your game. So in other words, they are tested and they work for the level they're supposed to be designed for. That is an aspect of them. And then the last thing is, and not the last thing as in the least important thing, because all three things are very important, great monster lore to help create adventures, because Dungeon Masters are the ones who need the Monster Manual, not the players, truly. Ultimately, it's them that need it, and they need that lore to make the adventure for the monster to exist in. And that is really important too. So three things. So does that succeed? First off, I'm going to say I feel like this book is incomplete. I will present all of the positives first, and then I'll go over the negatives that I think exist in the book last. I'll do that last. So all the positives first. I want to make it clear I have not bought the physical book. I do have access to the digital 2025 Monster Manual, so I have looked through the digital version, not the physical book. I did not pay for it because I just refuse to pay for anything nowadays. So it seems to be one of those things that it's just getting too expensive. Anyway, positives. The artwork is generally quite great. Like I would say, cover artwork, interior artwork, generally it's great. There are some action scenes with monsters in battle. Not always. I would say they're sprinkled in there, but it's not like the majority is action scenes, not at all. The majority of the art, or the vast majority of the art, in my opinion, is a bit more hardcore, definitely evocative, terrifying, horrific. It got a metal feel, like there's a sort of a heavy metal feel to it, and it's much more adult in many cases. There are more monsters in the 2025 Monster Manual compared to other Wizards of the Coast books. So there's 503 stat blocks. That doesn't mean there's 503 different monsters. There are different versions of things in this book. Okay, we'll get into that. But there are 503 stat blocks. So that's a lot more than 2014. The monsters are partially alphabetically arranged. I'm just going to say that. I'll get back to this. So it is alphabetical, partially. The 2025 Monster Manual is larger than the 2014 Monster Manual. It has 384 pages, I believe, which is, I don't know, roughly 30 or so pages more. I mean, it's not a huge difference. Is it 25, 30 pages more? The text size is actually larger, and it has a different text font. So it should make the monster book easier to read. I'm reading it off a digital version, so it's not very easy for me to establish, but I know the text font is larger, and it is a different font, and they've selected a font to make it easier for you to actually be able to read it. So if you've got old eyes or you wear glasses, should help you. The contents page doubles as an index for the monster book. So unlike the 2014 Monster Manual, which did have a contents page and an index, they have made the contents page the index as well. It's supposed to double, doing two jobs. They're using a diagram now for the stat block to explain and break down how the stat block works. I think this is a wonderful improvement. All monster manuals explain how their stat block works, even the older ones. But this is probably a little bit cleaner. I think it's a good improvement. Some simplification of the stat blocks has been made to make the monster maths easier to run for a dungeon master by using a shorthand notation for attacks and special abilities. It may not be short enough for you, but it's certainly shorter than it was before. Monster abilities that use an action are now generally just either an attack roll or a saving throw, but not both. Okay, I think this is an excellent change to speed up combat, ensure monsters get to use their special abilities before dying, because when you have two stages, the reality is they probably won't get to do anything. You know, if you have to make an attack roll and there's a saving throw, or a saving throw followed by another saving throw, you wind up with things just not happening. Basic bite and claw attacks are condensed into what is called the rend attack in one sentence as a mechanical rule. It's a sensible idea. It takes up less space. I feel like you could have just said bite or claw and had one sentence, but they've decided that the word rend was the better option. Rend goes back to 3.5 and 4e, by the way, if you're wondering where they got that idea from. There are a lot of subgroups of the same monsters with different levels, because I think Wizards of the Coast has finally realized, or probably realized, that their assumption about bound accuracy is incorrect. That low-level monsters are not a challenge for high-level characters. And there's not much you can do about that. Now, I think the reality is that Dungeons & Dragons 5e was never really a true bound accuracy system anyway, because the monsters are bound, but the characters are not. Player characters were able to move their numbers around quite a lot. And when you can do that, it's not really bound anymore. And I think even if you had a more truly bound accuracy system, I do not believe that low-level monsters will ever be challenging for high-level characters. It's mathematically ridiculous to think that they could be achieved. It's not a sensible way to look at building monsters. Now, Dungeon Masters can use a range of cultists or other monster types with different challenge ratings throughout their campaign. So still in theory, it means that you should be able to challenge the player characters. So instead of just having a cultist that's level 1, so challenge rating 1 or 2 or 3, you've got it spread over a number of different challenge ratings. Okay. Animal Lords from the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons books have been included as new monsters for the 2025 Monster Manual for Dungeons & Dragons. So they're not new. They've been around. They've just been brought back. Legendary monsters have had their 2 or 3 action economy cost removed. So this was really seriously required. So some monsters, when they used a legendary action, might be able to do something that cost 1 of their legendary actions out of the 3 that they had, or it might cost 2 or 3. And so that is gone. Now every action that's legendary is just 1 action. So you're going to get to do 3 different things, not just 1 thing during a round. Damage resistance is mostly gone, not completely, which is good in my opinion. It reduces the player and dungeon master's workload in an already sort of very complex game. And I know a lot of people say, 5e is not complex. Yes, it is. yes, it is. It may be compared to 3.5 or 4E, or you might even say AD&D, but honestly, it is still a very complicated system. A lot of monsters used to have damage resistance, like almost there were so many monsters in the old monster manual 2014 that had damage resistance to piercing, slashing and bludgeoning damage. So what does that mean? That literally it would come up in combat all the time, and that slows down the game, because you've got to take the number, halve the number, round it down, deduct it from your hit points. There's a whole lot of extra steps involved. You could say, well, that maths is not that hard to do. When it's late at night, yes, it can be very hard to do. Anything that has extra steps will take longer. Okay? It was also pointless to have damage resistance once players gained a magic weapon, because magic weapons literally would neutralize damage resistance. But now what they've done is a magic weapon doesn't neutralize damage resistance if it does have damage resistance. Okay? And what essentially would happen is, if you had a magic weapon, it would say in the description of that ability or feature, damage resistance to bludgeoning, piercing or slashing damage to non-magical weapons. So if you had a magical weapon, you were literally doing double damage, doubling your output, rather than just a +1 or a +2 to damage based off what type of weapon it was, or magical weapon it was. So that's a good move, I think. Getting rid of that, the provisor of it being a magical weapon or non-magical weapon, just saying it has damage resistance if it does, and having lost a lot less monsters with damage resistance. Monsters generally have more hit points, do more damage, and are more interesting in terms of the special abilities that they have. I've gone through a lot of them. I've broken down a few of them, actually quite a bunch of them. And yeah, I would say ultimately there have been improvements, which you would expect them to have made improvements to something that needed improvements. High-level monsters have gotten a huge improvement compared to 2014. You can see a vast improvement in what they're doing here. Monsters have higher initiative bonuses too, because often they have included proficiency bonuses to their initiative, or expertise, so doubled the proficiency bonus and added that in as you know, so the expertise in it. So now creatures have a better chance to actually go first, or get a chance to use their abilities and their attacks before they get killed. And initiative is near the top of the stat block, a good change. That's where it would need to be. Like, where do you put it? At the top where you need it. Because you used to have to go and look for, figure out what it was. Basically, it was the dexterity modifier, but now it's spelled out. Monster stat blocks now include passive initiative to speed up what the dungeon master is rolling. So you don't have to roll; you can just use that passive check essentially as your initiative. It's right there; it's already calculated for you. I think this is a good change, but the real problem still lies with the player characters who take too long, quite often rolling initiative themselves. So the real problem is not the dungeon master, the problem is the player characters rolling initiative. There are a few new monsters, but most are variants on existing monsters. So there's more than one type of goblin. There was 2 before, and now you have you've got a hexer, goblin hexer, a spellcaster essentially. You've got quite a few more cultists. You've got a lot more bandits. There are just versions of them. So there's a lot more there that you can use if you want. Okay. This is D&D 4E design. Like, this is what Dungeons & Dragons 4E did, this book. Okay. Essentially, that is the book this is where this idea came from. There are a lot of different tables included with the monster entries to help provide inspiration and ideas. Some are good, some aren't. It's a mixed bag, I would say. Dragons and some other monsters are now spellcasters, so they can cast spells. Now, that was a variant option before, and now it is not. Spell slots have been replaced with a number of times you can cast the same spell each day, which might make it easier to track spells, but you're still tracking something. I think what it's done is it's just changed the way you have to track spells, not necessarily change the amount of work you have to do. So now instead of having to pick through the level 3 spells, which ones I've cast, well, you're just going to be ticking against the spell, right? Well, now you'll be ticking against the spell, and you know that you can tick against that spell twice or 3 times during your combat, if you even get that far. Because I mean, most of the time, a combat, unless you're casting spells as a legendary action, you're not going to get to do that more than what 3 times. So it may not make any difference. So I think you're just tracking something else. You're just tracking spells being cast in a different way. It's still a change I would have made myself. Like if I had a choice between having to track spell slots or spells cast per day, I would have gone with spells cast per day. That would have been my choice. The appendix has monsters listed in groups by environment or habitat, challenge rating, monster group, and monster type. And it does not include page numbers. There's no page numbers there, but they have done that. They've taken the tables that were in the Dungeon Master Guide for 2014 and put it into this monster manual. This is a good change. This needed to happen. That's where it should be. The design team has acknowledged that modern players and dungeon masters don't really read books anymore and has reduced the number of words that are required to read. Now, I'm being sarcastic, people, but one of the things I have noticed is there is definitely a very big chunk of the modern audience that don't read a lot of books. There are still people who do. But what I'm saying is there are less words in this monster manual compared to the other one. Like there's a lot less words to read, literally, because the book is primarily art, stat block, and if you're lucky, you get monster lore. So we're going to talk about all the negatives now, okay? All the things that I don't think are great about this book. And I have quite a long list, just as I did with, there's a long list for the positives. So the 2025 Monster Manual is a repeat, essentially, of the Dungeons & Dragons 4E Monster Manual in terms of its design and philosophy, which is not a good thing, as it focuses primarily, I believe, on the mathematical stat blocks. Now, you might say that that is the most important thing in the book anyway, Fred. No, I don't. And I won't agree with this for a couple of different reasons. Because monster books are not just stat blocks, okay? It's not just a list of stat blocks. Most people wouldn't buy a book that just had a list of stat blocks and art. In this case, people are buying some of this stuff. I don't know how much. Everybody has a different idea of what's going on. But the Dungeons & Dragons 4E Monster Manual, its design philosophy was about a quarter of a page of monster art or half a page of monster art, a stat block which would take up about half a page, and monster lore was, if you were lucky, you would get quarter of a page. That is what was happening. And often you would have more than one stat block because you have variants on monsters. And this is exactly what the 2025 is doing. They are essentially following that design philosophy. I believe that that is a bad way to go. I think if you are a player and a power gamer, the monster art and the stat blocks may well be the only thing you're interested in. But the Monster Manual is not just for the players. It's actually primarily a Dungeon Master tool. It needs to do the job for a Dungeon Master. There are still some monster illustrations in here with stark backgrounds or boring environments. It's in an environment. It's not really doing anything. It's just standing there. So it's not like everything is an action scene, okay? A few pieces of artwork are downgrades from the depictions that you could find in 2014. So I would say literally some, not all of it, but there are some in the 2014 Monster Manual that are better than the 2025 Monster Manual. In my opinion, some of them come off as being goofy or really poor. There's not a lot of them, fortunately, which is a good thing. But yeah, so you've got an upgrade with some and a downgrade with others. The 2025 Monster Manual is not the largest monster manual made because Wizards of the Coast has been stating that this is the largest monster manual ever made, and I'm afraid it's not true. If you have older versions of D&D, you would know that Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2E, the Monstrous Manual, has between 8 or 900 monsters. 8 or 900 monsters. The Monstrous Compendium, which was a folder, had even more monsters than that. That's a lot. That is significantly more than 503. Okay? Even if you ignore the normal referencing methods, monsters aren't in alphabetical order. Monsters are sometimes grouped, like Modrons are grouped together. If you're looking for Modrons, you look for Modron, turn to M, and you'll find all Modrons, even if they have a different name. They're not just called Modron. It's Modron Pentadrone, or whatever it is, or Duodrone, or whatever. And then others aren't actually grouped, like dragons. Dragons are listed by, if it's a red dragon, it's under red dragon. So you go to R. And if you want a white dragon, you've got to go to W for white dragon. So it's not truly alphabetical, okay? It's all over the place. Orcs, Drow, Duergar are missing from the book. And other humanoids are also missing from the book. Not just them. There's quite a few. And I think this is due primarily to Wizards of the Coast's fear of the community outrage machine. There are people within the community outrage machine who can't distinguish between a fantasy species or race and a real human being. And so they start saying that orcs are a depiction of a particular race in real society, and they're not. Or that Drow are a real depiction of somebody who's, in society, in our real world. Or Duergar are. And so they've really just tried to avoid all of that by just taking them out completely. Older versions of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons included all the playable races as monsters in their monster manual. How revolutionary. So if I pick up this book, I will find humans in here. You can fight and kill humans, so humans are here. You can find orcs, you can find Duergar, you can find Drow. They're all here, okay? You can play them, but you can also have them as monsters. How revolutionary. I feel it's strange we've had usually society is supposed to move forward. Sometimes it moves backward. I guess that's why we had the Dark Ages for such a long time. The removal of some humanoid monsters has been stated by Wizards of the Coast as a needed change because they are now player character options and they're trying to be sensitive to the modern tabletop role-playing game community. But it's a slippery slope. As I said before, they were able to include them before and there was apparently no foreseen issue, or maybe there was. But it's a slippery slope because as more monsters are excluded from the monster manual, the end result is you have to keep excluding more monsters from the monster manual in the future because the outrage community will simply find something else to complain about. It's always been this way. It's been consistently, when they've run out of stuff, they find something else. So I would say that your future monster books are going to exclude even more stuff over time. And you're going to get more generic or bland stuff. You don't have to have cultural stuff in there when you're doing a monster. And I'll explain the sorts of things that monsters should have in terms of lore, if that is the real issue. But yeah, we'll get there. Anyway, now the lore and story and narrative of monsters has been heavily reduced to the point of being either useless or non-existent most of the time. There are some monsters that clearly the design team had members who loved that monster and they've put special attention into them. Quite often they are IP monsters, like the Mind Flayer, Beholder, things like that. So that's a real sad thing to see. In fact, the lore for monsters has not just been reduced, it has significantly changed again. They keep changing things as the outrage machine goes and pushed pressure on them, and so they change it because they're trying to appeal to what they foresee as the broader audience. And it may well be the broader audience. But there's an issue here, okay? You start changing things too much, and there's no end in sight. People in general know the original mythology or legend behind specific iconic monsters, like the mythology behind the Pegasus, or the mythology behind the Medusa. Okay, the Medusa is not a monster. The Medusa is a gorgon, and the name of that gorgon is Medusa. Right? There's only one. Now, you can make it a monster that has multiples, I suppose, for Dungeons and Dragons, but people understand that narrative. They understand the narrative of the dragon. They understand the narrative of a lot of monsters, the basilisk. They want those narratives, not the Wizards of the Coast sanitized, unrecognizable garbage that they've been putting out, unfortunately. And I would say a vast majority of the stuff they're putting out that are making changes aren't always good changes. Some are, but the vast majority aren't. Monster types have had some changes as well. Some make sense, like the goblin being fey, because if you look at the goblin in terms of folklore, it was always a fey creature. It's a naughty, nasty fey creature. Okay, let's not take the naughtiness away from the goblin. That's why it's called the goblin. It's the nasty fey. It's not the fairy. Okay, while others like the gargoyle are an elemental, which is bizarre. Now it was still an elemental, the gargoyle, back in 2014. It is now in 2025. They haven't changed that. But a gargoyle, is that not a construct? Why is that an elemental? In what way is that it's not an earth elemental. That would be an elemental. But a gargoyle? So there's a few things. There's not a lot, but I would say they have made some monster changed the monster types, and that's been a good idea. Because goblin should not have been a humanoid. It should have been fey. Anyway, a monster book should include the following lore. Now, you might have noticed when I was talking about the positives for this book. What did I talk about? Mostly the stat blocks and the art. And that was it. Because that was really all they had. Okay, so things that you need to have, and if you go to my Patreon, you'll find that, and on my channel, you'll find that I talk about this stuff all the time. Things that you need to know: how your monster senses work. Okay, what sort of senses do they have in terms of smelling, their sight, their hearing, okay, their touch, all that sort of stuff. How they interact with stuff, the senses, their motivation. What are they motivated for? They might have different motivations other than to eat something for food. Communication, telepathy, do they talk? Do they use scent? Do they use body language? Like that sort of stuff. Diet, what do they eat? Do they eat veggies? Do they eat plant matter? Or do they eat meat? How do they reproduce? Do they reproduce at all? Maybe they don't. The sort of habitat, the ecology, how they interact with everything else in the environment. What is their territory? What sort of range do they have? What sort of combat tactics do they actually have? Now, they talked about having combat tactics in this book. They really don't. Okay. What minions has the monster got? Or what allies do they form? Who will they ally with? Do orcs ally with goblins? Do we get that information there? Do dragons ally with the kobold? Or drakes, or something like that? Heck, you don't even find drakes in this new 2025 Monster Manual. Add the drake. Why not? Smaller, sort of dinosaur-like dragon. So yeah, those are the things you really need to have in terms of lore, and it is absolutely vital if you're going to build stories or adventures or the opportunity to have an adventure. If you're a game master, you need this stuff, and it needs to be there. Now, if you don't mind the lore being reduced or gone for the monsters, and I know there are some people who feel like, it doesn't matter to me. I don't need the lore. Okay, you can reduce the amount of monster lore there. You can change the monster lore. It can be gone completely. It's not a big issue. But who cares what you think? Because it's not about you. I'll make it clear. A monster book, okay, has to be built and made for somebody who doesn't know anything. Okay? If you don't read books, that's on you, not on me. If you already know the monster lore, that's great, but that doesn't help anybody else. Or if you would prefer to just make it up yourself rather than somebody provide it for you, you could always do that before. The rationale for having monster lore is for new people who need it, who don't know this stuff, okay? It's absolutely no good to somebody who is new, or if you're not good at memorizing stuff and you have to go back through and read the monster lore again to remember, oh, okay, my dragon should have some sort of dragon hoard, treasure hoard. Like, I just forgot I should have a treasure hoard. Where's my treasure hoard? What will it be? Okay, all right. So monster lore is there to remind people who have forgotten what the stuff is, and for new people, you've got to have it there. You can't just say, well, don't worry about it. That's not sensible at all. The 2-page contents table is an index in the book, but it's a really poor index. It doesn't follow conventional organization. So, and it's not detailed. It's not formatted like a reference book. It's actually really badly organized, because the thing with table of contents is you would list the different areas that you're going to talk about or cover, right? Now, if you decided the table of contents needed to be alphabetical, that is fine. If you're going to split up all your dragons and have them in different locations within your book, because you want the red dragon to be under R and the white dragon to be under W, great. But do that the same for everything else. Gelatinous cube under G, the black pudding under B. Okay, you do it that way. And then you have an index. And in the index, it lists everything by its name and gives you the page number. But if it's a category like an ooze, then you then list all the pages where you would find the oozes. And then you have a page that lists all the stuff for the dragons. Like there's a section that says dragons, okay, and an index, this is dragons, and then all the pages that you need to turn to find all the various dragons. And it's usually like an indentation to indicate that the dragon you're looking for under dragons in this section is the white dragon. On this page, it's going to be the red dragon. Does that make sense? That is how you would normally structure a reference book. And Wizards of the Coast has been making books for a long time, so why are they not doing this? This is really strange. Now, the 2014 Monster Manual had a separate table of contents and an index as well. It did not combine them. This is arranged correctly. So this book arranged your table of contents correctly and your index, compared to the mess that I consider the 2025 book to be. It is not well organized. It is absolutely bizarre as. Now, lair actions have been removed, which is easier for Dungeon Masters to deal with, in my opinion. I would say that this is done as a quality of life, take pressure off the Dungeon Master. But it was also a really interesting mechanic connected to the environment. I think the problem with the lair action is they often would have 2 or 3 different lair actions that you could use on Initiative 20, and you had to choose which one you were going to use. Don't give them a choice. Give them one. Pick the one that they can just use every single round, and if you don't want to use lair actions, you leave it alone. Lair actions are there for legendary monsters because often legendary monsters tended to fight alone and not have minions with them. So the idea was that you have a lair action and then you have your legendary monster, you're getting more things to do, which balances out the action economy between the players and the Dungeon Master's monsters. Okay, or monster. Of course, you can add in minions as well to shake it up and make sure there's more actions going on. But lair actions going, not a great idea. I think that's a sad thing to see go. I do think that there was also, they've removed regional effects as well. And I think having regional effects and lair actions was probably too much. Okay. Damage immunity to piercing, slashing, and bludgeoning damage is mostly gone. And this is done to not penalise the martial classes who usually can't do fire damage or cold damage or acid damage or something like that. But unfortunately, removing damage immunity to piercing, slashing, and bludgeoning damage misses the point of acquiring a magic weapon, because you should not have a damage immunity that cannot be circumvented by having a magical weapon. The whole point of having a magical weapon is that it should be able to get through damage immunity. Okay, so taking away damage immunity is not a great idea. I don't want there to be a lot of it. It should exist. It probably should be for higher level monsters where it makes sense narratively. But yeah, it's not a great change as far as I'm concerned. The challenge rating system is not the measure of difficulty compared to your character class, but instead it is the experience point budget. It's not intuitive. If you said to me a challenge rating 1 monster was the equivalent of placing something up against a character of level 1. So if I have 4 characters that are all level 1, I only need to select 4 monsters that are challenge rating 1. It would have been a very simple calculation. Now, does that allow for a lot of variation? Not necessarily. Possibly why they went with the experience point budget. But even if you think about it that way, it doesn't work. So I'm not fond of the fact that challenge rating, it only distinguishes one monster from another monster. So you're hoping that a monster that is challenge rating 1, all monsters that are challenge rating 1 are essentially the same power level, which they probably won't be. And then, of course, challenge rating 20 monsters are going to be a lot more powerful than challenge rating 1 monsters. It's really just a scale for the monsters themselves. The design team have still included challenge rating 20 plus monsters, which I think is absolutely pointless, because there's only 20 levels for the player characters. Why are you going that high? It's a leftover remnant of Dungeons & Dragons 4E, in my opinion, where we had 30 levels of player character and 30 levels of monster. And they have still adopted this. It's weird how there's just things that carry over that they need to carry over. Now, why is it pointless to include challenge rating 20 plus monsters? I'm fine with challenge rating 20, but anything higher, like 21, 30, it's a bit ridiculous. You throw them in a player character or a group of player characters, and it slows down the game to hours for a single combat. That is what it's like. I know, because I've played from level 1 to 20. I know what it's like. It's not a fun experience. Now, the other problem is that playtesting challenge rating 20 plus monsters requires you to have a party of level 20 characters, which rarely occurs during development. This is not something they generally test. They don't have time. How are you supposed to do that? It would take hours to test each monster because, of course, as soon as you do that, there are so many hit points. They might be doing a lot more damage, but everything gets more complicated. The challenge rating of monsters has not changed, where some of them should have had a different challenge rating. So, for example, the zombie is too low. Its challenge rating is really not suitable for the type of monster you're using it for. I guess the idea being by having a really low challenge rating under 1, that'll help. But the challenge rating for the zombie isn't right. The Jackalwere, its challenge rating is way too low. It should be a lot higher. The Jackalwere is really dangerous as a monster. Like, as soon as you give a low-level monster damage immunity, oh my gosh, that changes the thing into a vastly more deadly monster. And if you make the damage immunity that a Jackalwere has something like piercing, slashing, and bludgeoning, low-level characters don't generally have magic weapons. So the Jackalwere really needed to have a complete retool, if you ask me, in terms of its level, and also the zombie. There are no monster creation rules in the 2025 Monster Manual. So if you were hoping that there were creation rules for making your own monsters and home brewing, they're not there. They're also not in the 2024 Dungeon Master Guide. Why? Now, I think this is possibly one of these reasons or all of these reasons. I think it's probably all of these reasons I'm about to give. And that is that Wizards of the Coast doesn't really want people to make their own monsters. And instead they want them to buy the official monster book, the Monster Manual for 2025, and anything they release in the future. They don't want to have competition, and they don't want people to make their own stuff. Which is why on my channel we've been making a lot of 2025 monsters. The mathematics for the 2025 monsters could be so hard and complex that you can't explain it in a book, because it's some sort of highly advanced complex spreadsheet, and they can't provide you with a spreadsheet because it just wouldn't make sense. How do you put that into an analog book? You might be able to provide it as a digital tool. There's also another problem potentially, in that the Wizards of the Coast spreadsheet is still flawed. In other words, it is not perfect, that it is not fully tested, that even though they're working based off this, there's a chance that what the maths they have would be pulled apart by somebody and shown to be incorrect. And that tends to happen. As soon as you publish something, people pull things apart. Now, Wizards of the Coast, I think, also fears third-party publishers. Because if you give the monster maths in a table that's easy to understand and read, like they did for the Dungeon Master Guide 2014, I'm not saying that was perfect, but if you give them something like that, it would probably lead to someone else doing a better job of the monster stat blocks. Because they would go through and they would figure it out, and then they would go and test stuff, and they would be able to see where the holes were. It would also make it easier for the third-party publisher to start making their own monsters for that system, which I don't think they want to have happen. I think they want to force third-party publishers to go and backward engineer whatever they're doing for their monsters, provided their monsters are actually correct in the first place. The monster tactics section is a couple of sentences. It's very general, like use the most powerful abilities first. Pretty obvious, rather than, it doesn't specify the specifics to a particular monster. And unfortunately, I think monster tactics can usually be explained in one sentence. Older versions of D&D often took a paragraph to do this, but I think you can get the basic gist across in one sentence for a specific monster. But there's nothing in this book. So if you're looking for monster tactics, how to use your monsters correctly, you won't be provided that. It's not there, okay? I mean, for an example, a dragon. What is the tactics for a dragon? Fly above the player characters. You fly and breathe on as many characters as you can. When you don't have a breath weapon, you pick one up, fly up in the air and drop them. That's it. That's it. That's the basics for dragon. Do you know what I mean? If you've got spell casting, then of course it's going to get a little bit more complicated. You might have to add in another sentence. Okay? The treasure tags. They decided, they talked a lot about treasure tags, and then it tells you what treasure the monsters have. And the problem is, it's not very good. It's general. It's mostly useless to a dungeon master, because what does it say? Most of the time, it says none or any. So if you say any, you might as well say none. Like, that doesn't really help a lot. Okay? You really need a sentence or a few more words to actually tell you what the heck you're likely to find. Otherwise, how's that supposed to help you? You know, a dragon. Tell me you're going to find magic armor or magic items, magic weapons, a lot of gold. Those sorts of things would be helpful for a dragon. That's pretty obvious. You can do that for all the monsters. And if you put down none, you just create a problem for a dungeon master who has to now create something. You know, even for a monster that doesn't normally collect treasure themselves, you might be able to pick up the teeth that fall out, the claws that come off, the skin from a snake, the scales off its body. It might be all sorts of things. Maybe its bones are important. Maybe the poo that comes out is full of silver. Like there are monsters that are like that. Most monsters don't have a gear section, even if they're wearing armor or using weapons. And the armor and shields worn by monsters used to be listed beside the armor class, and that's gone now. So if you look at the top of your stat block, it used to say what armor it was wearing and what shield, if it had a shield. And so you could give that to your player characters when they were looting the body. It doesn't say that. And here's the problem when you do something like this. Instead, if you include a gear section and only for a few monsters that would have gear, what about the monsters that don't have a gear section that probably should have a gear section? Because narratively and logically it doesn't make sense to the players and probably to you, where a monster is wearing armor and weapons but they don't have gear. What if your players say, but I just fought that goblin and it was attacking me with a short bow and short swords. Are you telling me there are no short swords and short bows to collect off it as loot? That didn't make any sense. What's going on here? It doesn't have a shield? How? Like, narratively it doesn't make sense. So the gear section is not good. It's not an improvement at all. More monsters have bonus actions than ever before and reactions. This is a response to the fact that monsters can't keep up with the action economy of the player characters. And player characters now have more bonus actions than they ever had before and more reactions than they ever had before. But it makes the Dungeon Master's the Dungeon Master's job harder. It creates more complexity. It's not a good move. The smart move would be to have eliminated bonus actions from monsters and simply said, these are things you can do once per round, okay, and that's it. Or given them something else. And they haven't solved that. But they also have to take the bonus action away from the player characters, and that would have solved a lot of your problem as well. Reduce the complexity, and you get a better result. Now, Mike Mills, the designer of the bonus action, he is the designer, not Jeremy Crawford, has stated that the bonus action is hot trash because it should be removing complexity from the game. And it's not. He stated that the bonus action should be completely removed from the game. And why is that? The bonus action was intended to restrict what players could do during their turn. But it doesn't achieve this goal. Okay? And monsters would be better off with just something that you could do once per round, or as an action, or having multi-attack. Okay? Just do that, or multitask. Like you can include attacks and other things, and you can add it up to a certain number. Like you can do 3 or 4 things from this list. That would have been probably smarter than including the bonus action, in my opinion. And you know, you can reduce the number of things a monster has to do actively if you reduce the things that the players can do. But that's not going to work unless you affect the player handbook. And 2024 Player's Handbook has got a lot more that you can do. Monster spell lists have not been solved. So you still get spells listed. They don't tell you how the spell works in the stat block, which means you've got to look up how the spell works or learn how the spell works and memorize it. Or you've got to have spell cards. But I don't see a reasonable solution to this. And because if you were to add the effect of a spell, particularly if monsters have many spells, you would get stat block bloat. Like the stat block would just get bigger and bigger and bigger and quite unwieldy and hard to actually run. So I don't think there's an easy solution to this. I am still trying to think hard about how that could be done. The solution might be that you provide a monster spell list and then you list 2 of the most common spells that monster would use. Maybe the one that they can use that's a cantrip would be built into the stat block, and maybe another one that's a really powerful spell that they can use 2 or 3 times, which is essentially the length of your combat. Like your combat's probably about 1 to 3 rounds, and then it's over. So you've got most of the tools you need, and then of course if you want to do anything extra, then you could. That may be the solution, but I don't know. We'll see. They haven't figured it out yet. I think they did something like that with a mage, though. The mage is kind of built that way because you're not going to attack with a dagger. That would be silly. Use a spell. There are a few high-level monster stat blocks that are so complex and so large they will be difficult to run, like the Animal Lord. I honestly think they would be quite difficult to run. This was the case for Dungeons & Dragons 4e, where you could have an entire page designated as a stat block, and so you had to really study that monster to be able to run it. There are a few new, unique... There are a few unique monsters in this new book, but there are very few new, unique monsters in this book. Why is that? Because there aren't that many monsters in D&D history. Like where would you find all these monsters from? I'm being sarcastic, people. It's not true. You didn't have to add in quite so many variants. Like, it is not necessary to have 6 different cultists. You're getting a bit carried away. I mean, if people are only playing from level 1 to 10 and hardly ever getting playing beyond level 10, like, why do you need to have 6 different types? It doesn't make any sense. There are plenty of different monsters that were unique that they could have included in the book, and they didn't. And I think that was a lost opportunity. The challenge rating and proficiency bonus are still not listed at the top of the stat block. Now, you might say, why do I need a proficiency bonus? One, because there's space at the top of the stat block anyway, so you might as well put it there. But also, challenge rating tells you how difficult the monster is, right? Sort of. Maybe. I would still put that. There's space there for it. You might as well put it there. I still don't understand why the monster attacks are not near the top of the stat block. We almost never use the ability score or the ability modifiers. That part of the stat block could be at the bottom, but it's near the top. They need to rearrange that stat block significantly. The habitat tags or names are really obvious. They don't really offer enough information to be useful. So if you have a habitat section and all you say is Underdark, like, that doesn't tell you much other than Underdark. Okay, we'll change it to caverns and caves. Okay, caverns and caves. But that's not enough information. Like, older versions of D&D could spend paragraphs talking about the habitat. Habitat is not just the environment, one word. You've got to do a bit more. I'm not sure increasing the monster stat block difficulty will be enough. And a lot of the monster stat blocks have not changed at all. There have been small tweaks. They're not huge changes. Some have had big changes. But I don't know if it's going to be enough because it'll take years to fully test all of these things. And you need to test them with competent, skilled players, okay, who know the system. And you need to test it with dungeon masters who are competent and understand how the monster works. And that can take 5 to 10 years. They did not have 5 to 10 years to test all this stuff. And you could say, well, they tested that from 2014 through to now. But no, they haven't, because they made changes. You make changes, you still need to test again. This is a normal process, okay? This is something they can't really get away from. The reality is you cannot play test for 5 to 10 years to make sure all your monsters are going to work. You'd go out of business, okay? So I don't fault them too much for that, but don't expect the difficulty of the stat blocks, even though they've got tougher generally, is going to be enough. You might find they still need adjustment. And this brings me to another issue in terms of playtesting, and that is that only 3 people are listed in the 2025 Monster Manual. Only 3 people are credited as playtesters. That's 3 people. Now, maybe they left out everybody else who was doing the playtesting, but from the feedback I've heard from the designers and Mackenzie, it sounded to me like there were probably just 3 playtesters. Were those 3 playtesters playing characters, or were those 3 playtesters the dungeon masters running a group of individuals? Normally I would think it would be a group of individuals, one person running whatever it is for a variety of people, okay? A group that they have got to sign an NDA or work for the company. Now, this is compared to the playtesting done by 2014. Now, that playtesting was done as they had what was called, it was a bit weird. We had a beta test and then we had an alpha playtest, which normally you'd think the alpha playtest is first and then the beta is after. But it was weird how they structured it. They were kind of back to front. But the 2014 Monster Manual, okay, the older one, had 175,000 people who play tested in the beta for those monsters, and that's that game system. And then they got additional feedback from 29 different people who were named for the alpha playtest, and I was one of them. And I was the dungeon master, and I ran a group of individuals. We signed an NDA. I don't think this has been adequately tested, these monsters. I really don't. You can make monsters tougher, but you still have to test them. Yeah? There's also a thing in this book that really annoys me, and that is they have quotes in the monster entries that are really pointless. They add no true value to the entry. They take away from decent lore that could have been included, and they take up a lot of space. And sometimes we have big chunks of space in the book where you could have, if you have nothing else that you can say, you could have put the quote there in that little space that was sort of a blank section. And you don't know what to do with it because you couldn't lay it out properly. But they haven't done that. The quotes actually are they're taking up real estate in the book that they shouldn't be, and they don't add enough value. So why do them? It's weird. I know it's a thing that Wizards of the Coast has been doing for a while, but in this book it's just so stupid. Anyway, I would also like to point out that the print version of the 2025 Monster Manual, so 2025 Monster Manual, the printed version, is full of errors. They've already made mistakes, so they've had to go and correct those mistakes on the first day. They released the changes on D&D Beyond for the digital version on the first day, and there have been many more corrections to this book after that. Now you might say, well, that happens with any publication. Seriously? First day they have to release an errata because they've made mistakes in this book? Now, there are a lot of things to check in a monster manual. There really are. There's a huge, you're talking about mathematics, you're talking about spelling, you're talking about a lot of different aspects that need to be corrected and checked for. But that's why you have people check it. You should have more than one person checking a book. Otherwise, and it's a big book, right? 384 pages, a lot of book. It's a lot of book there to check. But yeah, so if you've got a print version, it's already, I would wait. If you're ever going to buy this thing, which I don't think it's a great idea, I would wait until they've got rid of all of their mistakes. Now, my conclusion to this book is real simple. The art is hit and miss, with most of it great and some of it poor. So most of it is great and some of it's poor. But that's all right. It gets a point for that. It's art. It's done its job. Okay. The monster stat blocks have been generally improved. They are tougher, and they needed to be tougher. But that's not saying much because 2014 significantly need revamping on release. The Monster Manual released in 2014. I knew almost immediately when it came out that it wasn't going to be, the monsters weren't going to be tough enough for people. Okay. It is built around people who are inexperienced, who didn't have full knowledge of the game system, and it just didn't get enough time to be play tested. I was part of that process. I know what those time frames were, and so that's not saying a lot. Improving the stat blocks is not that difficult, but knowing how much you need to improve them by, that's different. I think they're trying to flatten it so that anything that's a challenge rating 5, that they're all pretty much on the same level as much as possible. Special abilities always are you can't really measure them. Do you know what I mean? So that's a bit more difficult. That's why playtesting is required. The 2025 Monster Manual fails horrendously when it comes to narrative or lore. It is, in my opinion, the worst corporate response to intolerant public censorship that I have seen. Okay, it reminds me of the witch hunts of Europe, and people's response. It's not quite as bad as that, but it reminds me of this. I consider the 2025 Monster Manual the second worst official publication for a monster book, and it's only trumped by one monster manual or three monster manuals, and that is the Dungeons and Dragons 4E Monster Manual. Probably one of the worst monster manuals that I've ever come across, and I've got a lot of them. Okay, that is not a good book. And the 2025 Monster Manual, really all you're getting out of it is slightly improved stat blocks that aren't probably fully tested. Now, there has been some argument that the original Advanced Dungeons and Dragons first edition Monster Manual, because it's so small and it's it's like one of the first ones, it's probably the worst one. But in my opinion, there's probably this at least scores points for across the three different categories of art. It's got lore, it's got the stat block. But 2025 fails horrendously in one area, and that's not a good thing. There are lots of opportunities, I believe, for third-party publishers and companies to publish a better product, and I have no doubt that Kobold Press, Paizo, Roll for Combat, everybody is going to print a better monster manual than Wizards of the Coast has, because the opportunity is there now. Just because you have left out so many things that aren't there, and you've left out one of the three core aspects of a monster manual. So somebody's going to do it better, for sure. Now, the problems with this book aren't just Wizards of the Coast's fault. You could say, I am blaming Wizards of the Coast for everything. No, I'm not. Not at all. Because the community needs to take responsibility by applying pressure to enact foolish censorship. You know, those motivations to enact and force censorship, which really didn't need to be there. Okay, it's forced Wizards of the Coast into the corner. They felt like they had no other choice to just leave stuff out, just because they didn't want social media to light up and start arguing about silly things. My opinion is, wait a bit longer if you're going to buy this new monster manual once all the errors are gone. And if you wait a bit longer, somebody's going to make a better book than this one, and you're probably better off to buy that one. Do you know what I mean? It is not a great book, in my opinion. That's really what I have to say about the 2025 Monster Manual. Not the best book I've ever come across, unfortunately. And at least there are worse ones. Anyway, so hopefully this was useful and helpful to you. Thank you for watching and listening. Thank you to all of my patrons who support me on Patreon. And till next time, keep rolling those 20s. Okay, very quickly I'll go through chat and then I'm going to go because I don't want to spend any more time talking about this book if I can help it. I see, okay, so people are filling out the poll still, 29 people. Hello, so I talked to Nacho Man about this weeks ago, this book. So Wizards and Warp Drives, you can go and check out the original. It's very long, it's like 2.5 hours, a lot of detail, we had a lot to say. Nacho Man doesn't always have the same opinion that I do, so it's going to have a different view, okay, rather than my view. But anyway, thanks for being here, Nacho Man and Fred Huber. Now, this is Three Hulsey? Hello, how are you? Hopefully I got your name right. Overboard, hello, how are you? Not buying anything for 2024 and beyond. If there's anything like anything I like for the new edition, I'll just steal the idea and homebrew. So far for me, I'm perfectly happy. Fair enough, Joe, I understand. I found Ed Greenwood's YouTube channel for some really cool lore for the Forgotten Realms. Oh, good. It's cool getting his personal take on some of the crazy lore. Of course, I would I would turn to AJ Pickett as well. I believe AJ Pickett is going to go into have a renaissance. His channel has been sort of, it dived and then plateaued, and he's just been holding on. But I believe that he's probably going to find he's going to get a big spike, because people looking for lore are going to go to his videos, which is great. Good news for him. Mr. Welsh. I believe Mr. Welsh has talked about this book and had not good things to say about the Monster Manual. Now, he's got a video too that talks about it. You should go and check him out. I will have to know what I will have you know that I have a lot of friends that are black, and only a few of them are 7 foot tall with green skin and tusks. Oh, dear, Glenn. Okay. It's sad that they don't have more information on lore in the monster book. Yeah, it is. I think they've missed the point that you don't make the monster book for the power gamers and the people who are playing characters. You make it for a dungeon master. So Nacho's got here, the generic stat blocks for humanoids doesn't work either. Yeah, and we know why, because they didn't include the special features for each of the different classes, like relentless attack or superior dark vision. So they're kind of a bit mixed up. They're not going to work. It is unfair to expect a stat block to do so much. There are every race of humanoids you can think of in the humanoid race. Yeah, I'm not sure why anyone would associate a monstrous creature as a certain color of humanoid race. All colors of people are human, not orc. Yeah. I'll explain. Maybe I should explain to you what's probably going on. I don't think I should. Should I? Let's get to the bottom of this chat. I'm almost there. Beholders have my favorite reproduction lore. Yeah, they are pretty cool. Yeah, absolutely. Hello, Cal-Ral. How's it going? Out of curiosity, how many play testers were in the Monster Manual versus 2000? So, well, Nacho, you already know the answer to that. You already know the answer. If you let me make their own monsters, then they don't. Yeah. If you let them make their own monsters, they won't use your product. That's part of the problem, right? AD&D had good loot tables. I don't think adding loot tables to monsters was the solution at all. Okay, it's not the solution, but at least giving you some idea of what you would expect to find, because the players always want to pick up stuff when they kill something, whether they take the monster's shit or their fangs or their claws or their scales or their skin or their intestines. It's got to be something. Do you know what I mean? Maybe if they sold these spell cards at a decent cost, the stat block could have a list of spells, brief descriptions of the common ones. Yeah, I don't think it's an easy solution. I don't think there's an easy solution to spell lists. I really don't think there is. Nacho Man loves, by the way, all of the different cultists, but then he uses a lot of cultists. We've discussed this. You have to go overboard, no problems. Thanks for hanging about. Thank you. Great review. James, thank you, James. It's sad. I like monster books, but I know I would normally get them, but I don't want to buy this one. Negative space, what do you got here? It still blows me away that they had an enlarged image of an imp and they still had a bunch of blank space. I know. Glenn, Mr. Welsh was pointing this out to me on a page. And it's got so much blank space, it's crazy. Decado 1628. Hello, buddy. It's been a while. Okay, so let's have a little discussion about this. Look, I don't think they're going to make this mistake again. But who knows? It's hard to know. I'm hoping they don't. The really good news is it has left the door open for third-party publishers to make a better book than the 2014 Monster Manual and the 2025 Monster Manual. You just got to give them a couple of years to get it printed, okay? Because they've got to write it, they've got to design it, they've got to test it, and then they've got to print it. And if you give them a couple of years, they'll get it done. And more than likely, there's a whole bunch of people out there that have already started that process as soon as they knew that there was going to be a new version of the Monster Manual. And I guarantee it, there were publishers sitting on the wings that have got a lot of their work done, and they just wanted to see what Wizards of the Coast was going to do first. And once they've done it and they release it, you could probably, I would say 6 months, 8 months, you're going to see some really good books come out that are going to be far better than the one that Wizards of the Coast has made. Now, I said that Wizards of the Coast is not fully to blame for this. And I wasn't sure if I would talk about this, but I will. For those of you who don't know, I have a bachelor's degree in psychology, statistical mathematics, and philosophy. I'm also done some training in teaching, so graduate diploma in teaching adults, and I also have some training as a counsellor. Okay, so that is my training. And on top of that, I spent 30 plus years in the health sector with people with intellectual disabilities, drug and alcohol issues, gambling issues, mental health issues, physical issues, physical disabilities. I said drug and alcohol, didn't I? And also brain injury. And one of the things that happens when you're working in an environment like that is you spend a lot of time with people who aren't functioning at their peak. Okay? And the more you work with them, the more you adopt their mental illnesses and their problems. Because if you think about it, if you spend so much time with them, you wind up copying them, they don't copy you. The way that, somebody who's got a mental illness or intellectual disability or drug and alcohol issues, they can't change their brain chemistry and their behavior as easily as you can. They're very fixed. So that means you're much more vulnerable to behavior change. And this happens to me. This is why I only work 3 days a week in the health sector, and I'm trying to trim down to 2 days a week, because if I don't, it is going to cause, it caused all sorts of problems. And I'm only starting to claw back from that. This is a normal process. I've discussed this with my supervisor. So what happens in society when you have people who have more mental illnesses than they had before, more drug and alcohol issues, more brain damage because of injury and brain damage occurs from taking drugs and other things. And you're also dealing with people who have, really bad habits developed by, their social or their upbringing. Like there's lots of things coming into play. So our society is really unwell. So when you have people who aren't unwell, spending a lot of time in a population that's growing and that is unwell, those people who are reasonably all right in terms of their faculties, their ability to think and operate diminishes. Okay? So this is what is happening in our community, and it's transitioned right through our whole society. And I think this is probably going to get worse rather than better, which is sad. There must be a way out of it, but I right now we don't seem to be following that route. So what happens is there's a saying, right? The easiest way to say this is the normal person is not as bright and not as well capable of dealing with their environment as they were before. Okay? That is what is happening in our society, and it's happened through our tabletop role-playing game community and the D&D community. And so what happens is there's a saying, and it's partly true, and that is that when good people don't do anything, evil prospers. Do you understand that? You remember that one? So when good people, okay, don't do anything, evil prospers. But that is actually not what's going on here, okay? What is happening is, the truth of the matter is that when people, whether they are good or not, when people, okay, think they are smart, but actually they are quite stupid and doing stupid things, believe they are good, okay, they start putting their beliefs and pressure on other people to behave in a way that is actually evil. And censorship and stopping people, freedom of speech is the surest way towards fascism. Telling people how to live their lives is the surest way of creating problems. Telling people how to play their D&D is the surest way towards a dark age, okay? And unfortunately, it's going to continue. And that is all I'm going to say. For those of you who understood what I said, I know it's a bit complicated, but think about it this way. The more unwell our society becomes, the more crazy the things we think will wind up being. I've seen this in my own work environment, where I remember there was a discussion about a client coming into the office and stealing stuff, smokes and so forth. And there's a lot of other things they shouldn't be taking from there as well. And the discussion was that the best solution was to lock that cabinet. And I said, no, that is not the best solution. The best solution is not to leave the staff room open in the first place so they can get into the office, so they can get into the cabinet. And a lot of our staff could not understand that. And that is a product of, if you spend too much time with people who are unwell, you will actually start developing really unhealthy ways of operating. So you surround yourself by people who are a lot more open and a lot more tolerant, and you've got to be careful about how much time you spend with people who have mental illness. And I don't just mean mental, I mean, taking drugs and alcohol causes a lot of damage to a person. Okay, you've got to be careful about that sort of thing. So got to be careful about that sort of thing. Anyway, I'm going to finish up here. I see there's a couple of people who are mentioning stuff. This is why Wizards and Warp Drives has become a mental health podcast. That's true. For those of you who don't know, I do this. We talk about movies mostly. I try to avoid D&D if I can on the Wizards and Warp Drives stuff. But that's where I am. Cranky Smurf. I don't like that they got rid of the weapon damage resistance. What's the point of having a silvered weapon as a common rarity? So I understand. So Nacho has the same. They made a huge change to the werewolf, right? The werewolf is probably the one you're talking about the most. James, 2025, Wizard of the Coast is mentally unwell, confirmed. Yes, but it's not just Wizard of the Coast, it's our community. They really need to open themselves up to the fact that maybe they're clinging to assumptions that just aren't true. Do you know what I mean? And everybody should be allowed to speak their mind, but you've got to evaluate sometimes. Wizard of the Coast has driven off older gamers with disposable like myself. They hate money. I don't think it's just going to be the older gamers. I think it's going to be a lot of people. You just watch. Just wait. Yeah? So I'm not going to talk about any more Wizard of the Coast books for the rest of the year. I'm not talking about any of their products. This was the only one. Okay? I will come back to making monsters for 2025 or 5e, but I am moving away from that to something else. This is the book that has some pretty good rules on how to make monsters, but not enough. So I had to build a table. I had to backward engineer it. I had to do a bit of research. And AJ Pickett has started writing stuff, new monsters that he wants made. So I'm going to make monsters for Shadow Dark for a while, okay? And I will still make stuff for 5e, but I think Shadow Dark is where I'll go because you do have rules for how to make monsters here. It's not perfect, but at least there is something, okay? So I'm going to get out of here. It is time to go. I've spoken long enough. So all the best. So thank you for watching and listening. Thanks to everybody who took part in the poll. Do you like the new 2025 Monster Manual for Dungeons & Dragons? Okay. Haven't got it, 48%. Oh dear. No, 21%. Yes, 15%. Just watching, 15%. Out of 33 votes. You've got to be kidding. Oh my God. Okay. So next week I'm making Shadow Dark monsters. And we'll see how it's, you've seen how I've done the 5e monsters. Let's see how easy it is to make a monster for Shadow Dark. That'll be interesting. I'm sure it will be. Anyway, thank you to all my patrons who support me on Patreon. I really do appreciate it and your patience. I want to say, wherever you are, whether it be the morning, the afternoon, or the night, please look after yourself, your family, and your friends. Okay, surround yourself by people who are good for you. Okay, that have good things to say and are sensible. It is absolutely vital. Until next time, keep rolling those 20s.